Good evening. Let's get right to that breaking news tonight. The U.S. now carrying out strikes, deadly airstrikes in retaliation for the drone attack that killed 3 American soldiers in Jordan. We're just getting this video in from our producer in Baghdad. NBC News has verified it, showing one of those strikes on a weapons warehouse belonging to an Iranian-backed militia group in western Iraq. You can see some of the damage and the flames there. U.S. Central Command saying it hit more than 85 targets in Iraq and Syria tonight. Several deaths reported, and the timing of the first round of strikes, no coincidence. They came just hours after this solemn moment. The flag-draped coffins of those 3 U.S. soldiers arriving at Dover Air Force Base today. President Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden in attendance. Sergeant William Rivers, Specialist Kennedy Sanders, and Specialist Breonna Moffett were killed last weekend when a drone packed with explosives struck a base in northeast Jordan near the Syria border. 30 others were injured. According to the Pentagon, there have been more than 160 attacks on U.S. forces by Iran-backed groups since October 7th. And late today, President Biden, not mincing words, saying in a statement, quote, "If you harm an American, we will respond." U.S. officials also signaling the strikes could last for weeks. We'll have a live report from the region tonight, but we want to begin with NBC Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander.
Tonight, the American retaliatory strikes have begun. U.S. Central Command saying late this evening, U.S. forces began striking more than 85 targets in Iraq and Syria, using numerous aircraft, including long-range bombers flown from the U.S. The targets, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Quds Force and affiliated militia groups, hitting their command and control operations centers and intelligence centers, rockets and missiles, and unmanned air vehicle storage, among other sites. President Biden tonight saying our response began today. It will continue at times and places of our choosing, adding, "Let all those who might seek to do us harm know this. If you harm an American, we will respond." The U.S. strikes come in response to that deadly drone attack by Iranian-backed militias that struck Tower 22, a desert outpost in Jordan, killing 3 U.S. service members. That attack among more than 160 against American targets by Iranian-backed militias since October. President Biden had previously authorized limited strikes in response that even he acknowledged had not deterred the militias. And the president has been under pressure to respond more forcefully, especially after American service members were killed. All of it just hours after the commander-in-chief performed one of his most solemn duties, attending the dignified transfer at Dover Air Force Base as the remains of those 3 U.S. service members returned home. The President and First Lady joining the grieving families of 46-year-old Sergeant William Rivers, a soldier's soldier, his cousin said, 24-year-old Sergeant Kennedy Sanders, whose family said she was always full of life, and 23-year-old Sergeant Breonna Moffett, her parents remembering how she could light up a room. The U.S. today also launching preemptive strikes on the Iranian-backed Houthis. NBC's Courtney Coovey is in the region tonight.
I'm here on the USS Eisenhower in the Red Sea, where just a couple hours ago, nearly a dozen F-A-18 fighter jets took off from the deck of this aircraft carrier. Their mission, to stop multiple incoming drones fired by Houthi rebels in Yemen. They were supported by EA-18 Growlers, protecting the fighter jets from Houthi air defenses. Now, defense officials stress that these actions tonight were not part of the larger retaliatory actions that the U.S. has been talking about all week.
All right, Peter Alexander joins us tonight from New York. Peter, you have some new reporting on what was hit in these U.S. strikes?
Yeah, Tom, that's right. 2 U.S. officials tell NBC News at least half a dozen facilities were struck tonight, and that those sites were all directly linked to attacks on the U.S. or coalition forces in that region. We have also learned from officials tonight that B-1 bombers participated in these airstrikes by the United States. Tom, the real challenge tonight for the White House and for President Biden is to retaliate without igniting, without sparking a wider war here. President Biden himself in that statement tonight saying, quote, "The U.S. does not seek conflict in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world." Tom.
Peter Alexander leading us off tonight here on Top Story. Peter, we thank you for that. For more on these strikes and what they mean for the future of the region, I'm joined tonight by retired Army Colonel, Medal of Honor recipient, and NBC News military analyst, Colonel Jack Jacobs. Jack, always great to have you here in house. So first, just give me your take. What do you think about this response?
Well, it's long overdue, quite frankly. We have been trying to be measured in our response because we're terribly concerned about widening the war, as you've heard. And so instead of having massive retaliatory strikes, we've done it piecemeal. And of course, that hasn't convinced anybody. And the result is the continued attacks on American interests. You heard more than 160 in the last few months. I think the administration's finally decided that it needs to use a sledgehammer here and do a couple of things. First of all, degrade the capability of the militias to assault American interests, allied interests, and ultimately shipping in the Red Sea and the Straits of Hormuz. That's liable to come later. But seriously, to convince Iran, who has Quds Force advisors with all these militias, convince Iran to back off and not continue to support these militias, because we will continue to strike them and they'll lose people in Iraq and Syria.
Colonel, at the beginning of your answer, I think you described this response as long overdue. We gave these militia more than a week, nearly a week, I should say, to either run, to hide, to get out from where they were. Do you think this was still an effective strike, even though it took so much time?
Yes, I think it's long overdue. Not for this, not as a counterstrike for this, but don't forget we've been hit by these guys for a long time, and these kinds of strikes should have begun a long time ago. We have really good intelligence, and it doesn't matter where they go. We have a pretty good idea where they are. Fixed installations that have ammunition, command and control headquarters, and so on are very easy to find. I think I know we do have a large target list of other targets that we may ultimately hit, and the advice that ought to be given to the administration is to hit them sooner rather than later, and that'll slow down the attacks on American interests.
It's somewhat interesting, right, because you fought in the Vietnam War, guerrilla warfare, right? And yet we're now fighting these militias. We have drones, they have drones. The question becomes, how are they funded? How are they armed? And if they have some of the same tactical weapons as we do, does it level the playing field? And again, I know they're nowhere near our military capability, but it's drone warfare.
Well, you're quite right about that. And as long as they continue to have the capability to launch attacks, they will do so. They're funded by, trained by, and encouraged by Iran. We've known that for a long, long time. And like I said, the thing to do is to degrade their capability to continue these kinds of any kinds of attacks, and to convince Iran to back off. Iran has the long view. They're fighting for domination in the region. You could view this as a long-term battle between Iran on the one hand and Saudi Arabia on the other for dominance in the region. They want the United States out of there as quickly as possible. They want to destroy Israel, and we can't let either of those things happen. To the extent that we can continue these attacks, whether they're retaliatory or not, we should do so.
What do you think is next? Does the president now, has he been pulled into this war and there's no turning back? Do you see there's more strikes coming?
Yes. We have a very large target list. There's a cogent argument that says that we should not wait for another attack on our interests or those of our allies before we strike again. We do know where they are, a lot of them, and we should continue to attack them. And it will slow down the attack on our interests and those of our allies, and slow Iran down, at least for the time being. Ultimately, this is a long-term exercise. We need to do a better job of using our other instruments of policy, economic and diplomatic, in order to quiet things down.
Our U.S. service members were there in Northeast Jordan. They were killed in this drone attack. There was some confusion if that drone was an American drone, and it led to the death of these soldiers and then the injuring of several other soldiers. My question to you is, how much danger are our troops in that are currently stationed in that region?
They're in a great deal of danger, and not just from drones. I mean, the enemy has rockets, and they have guerrilla outfits and so on. We have to do a better job of protecting our troops while they're there in their mission of training and supplying indigenous troops to defend themselves. To the extent that we can't do that, we need to increase our capability to do that. There's a long-term decision that has to be made, how long we're going to stay there, to do what, and what resources we're going to have we're going to use in order to do that. What we can't do is abandon the mission and leave it to the Iranians to take it all over.
Colonel Jack Jacobs, we always appreciate your analysis and, of course, your service for this country. We thank you. Speaking of that region, we want to go live now to Kier Simmons, who joins us tonight from Erbil in Iraq. Kier, tell us more and explain to our viewers who exactly the U.S. was targeting here and what this group is made up of.
Well, Tom, the U.S. strikes, they've been powerful and they've been extensive, 85 targets, as you've been talking about, but they also are limited in some ways. So they are along the border between Iraq and Syria, in a place called Anbar province, and also across the border there in a place called Mayadin in Syria. Now, these are places where we know that Iranian-backed militia are based. There in Anbar, Kataib Hezbollah, the group that is accused of killing those US service members, it is there. And we are hearing tonight that its encampments there have been hit. And then over in Mayadin, for example, there is a strip there running away from the Iraqi border into Syria, where there are multiple Iranian-backed militia encampments and also an Iranian Revolutionary Guard base. And one monitoring group is reporting that 17 separate hits took place in that area tonight. So clearly substantial strikes, but in an area that is a longer border that runs to the Jordanian border, and that, of course, is where Tower 22 is, where those American servicemen and women were killed. And I say limited because tonight the scale of Tom of this operation is really going to spotlight for the American people just how extensive and how embedded Iran is here in this region. But at the same time, there were many, many targets that the US could choose. They haven't, for example, it appears, based on regional reports here about where the explosions have been taking place, they haven't, for example, targeted areas around Damascus Airport, where we know that there are Iranian Revolutionary Guard positions because the Israelis, for example, have been striking them there. So that is the aim here appears to have been to escalate, send a clear message to Tehran, but to limit and have this be still a response to what happened last weekend.
And Kier, you know, you have deep, deep experience in this region. You've been globetrotting for us, speaking to leaders in the region and also to your sources. If you can quickly, how does this impact the overall balance of this war?
That's a terrific question. Tonight, I don't think we know. It may not. And in a way, the US Biden administration may be hoping that it doesn't, because what they want is for Tehran to get the message, but not to overreact. The fundamental point here, though, is that Tehran's strategy is to try to push the US out of this region and put pressure on Israel. That's why Iran has been scaling up its influence and its positions in Syria, for example. And that is the fundamental challenge that the US faces. And whether tonight's operation really addresses that, I think that's still an open question.
Kier Simmons for us from Erbil in Iraq tonight. Kier, we appreciate all of your reporting. Please stay safe out there. Back here at home to our other major headline tonight, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis admitting to a personal relationship with the special prosecutor she tapped to lead the Georgia election interference investigation into former President Trump. How she's now defending her actions and the fiery response from Trump tonight. Blaine Alexander in Atlanta with the latest.
Tonight, a defiant District Attorney Fani Willis is breaking her silence. In a 176-page filing, she acknowledges a personal relationship with Nathan Wade, the special prosecutor she appointed to lead the Georgia election case against former President Donald Trump. But Willis denies any financial benefit or conflict of interest, writing, "While the allegations are salacious and garnered the media attention they were designed to obtain, they do not provide any basis for her to be removed from the case." That's what Trump co-defendant Michael Roman has asked for, accusing Willis of financially benefiting from a romantic relationship, saying Wade used money he earned from the DA's office to pay for vacations together. But in her response, Willis today provided her own receipts, saying travel was evenly split between the two, and arguing Wade made more money than the other special prosecutors only because he did much more work. The filing included a sworn affidavit from Wade, who said while the two were professional associates and friends when he was hired on the case, they later developed a personal relationship. But in a response of his own, Michael Roman says he has witnesses who will testify the relationship actually began before Wade's hiring. All of it has brought intense scrutiny to the closely watched case against Donald Trump and to Willis herself. Mr. Trump has also sought to have the charges dismissed, and today posting, "This scam is totally discredited and over." It all comes amid new pressure from Congress, where Republican Congressman Jim Jordan has subpoenaed Willis, seeking documents to determine whether she misused federal money.
Blaine Alexander has been leading our coverage of the Georgia election interference case. She joins us tonight from Atlanta. Blaine, to make it clear to our viewers, DA Fani Willis is not stepping down. She's not going anywhere. So what's next in this case?
Well, Tom, it's now up to a judge. There's going to be a hearing on this in about 2 weeks' time on February 15th. That's where we'll have an evidentiary hearing. Both Willis and Wade have been subpoenaed to testify in that hearing. But Willis is asking a judge to remove the entire thing, calling it tickets to a circus. She also is vowing to fight that subpoena, saying it's nothing but an attempt to harass and embarrass her personally. Tom.
Blaine Alexander for us tonight. Blaine, we appreciate all that. For more on Willis's filing today and what it means for this case, I want to bring in our legal eagles tonight. Bernarda Villalona, she's a former prosecutor now working as a criminal defense attorney, and NBC News legal analyst Angela Senadella. Thank you both for being here. So, Bernarda, I'm going to start with you. The allegations that Willis hired an inexperienced prosecutor in this case because she was involved with him. Willis's filing says this. We want to put it up on the screen. Although District Attorney Willis and Special Prosecutor Wade have been professional associates and friends since 2019, there was no personal relationship between them in November of 2021 at the time of Special Prosecutor Wade's appointment. And defendants offer no support for their insistence that the exercise of any prosecutorial discretion in this case was impacted by any personal relationship. If you were the judge in this case, would that pass muster with you? Because I ask because they're essentially saying, listen, we weren't in a personal relationship before, but then we got into a personal relationship. Does that make a difference?
It does make a difference. If I was Judge McAfee in this case, I'll make a decision based on the motions. I wouldn't even hold a hearing. We have the motions from both sides. We have an affidavit by Mr. Wade inside of the motion that was responded to by Fani Willis. So in terms of was there a personal relationship before the prosecution, before he was appointed as special prosecutor, she said no. She's already stating that it didn't affect her personally, no conflict of interest, financially, no conflict of interest. So there is no merit to this. So if I was Judge McAfee, let's stop the show. Let's stop this circus. Make a decision. Let's move on with the prosecution of this case.
Angela, one of Trump's co-defendants in this case, Michael Roman, who essentially brought these allegations to light in the beginning, is now putting out a statement saying that they're basically saying that Willis and Wade are lying about not cohabitating and about when the relationship started, saying, we have a statement we can put up, if they had nothing to hide in the first place because they did nothing wrong, then why did they intentionally not tell anyone about it until they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar? What do you think about this?
Well, I think that you need to figure out what is the truth here. And I think that both sides have such oppositional arguments that you have to put them on the stand. If I were the judge, I would do this evidentiary hearing. Unfortunately, it does become this tawdry he said, she said, and you have to delve into questions like, well, who started it first? When did it start? Was it in 2021? Was it in 2022? Who paid for what? Which is what we saw today in the motion, this affidavit. And these questions are tawdry, but ultimately come down to who's telling the truth.
Bernarda, we started with a Georgia election interference case, an investigation at the highest level of importance. And now we're talking about the DA and the special prosecutor essentially hooking up. This can't be good for the DA. She has important work to get to, and now there's a lot of distractions, including now a subpoena from Capitol Hill.
Exactly, and this is a big distraction. Of course, it doesn't look good. That's why I want us to keep the eyes on the prize. Let's focus on the prosecution itself, because let's remember, whether these two are knocking boots or not, there was a special grand jury and a grand jury that heard the evidence and determined, based on the evidence that was presented, that there was sufficient evidence to issue issue an indictment.
But is this becoming a distraction?
It is. And that's why I'm hoping Judge McAfee just kills this distraction on February 15th and makes a decision on the motions itself. I will say this. If I was DA Fani Willis, now you know this is a big distraction. Maybe the best part would be is that for Mr. Wade to step away as special prosecutor and just let the prosecution go forward with the other two special prosecutors that was presented, because you want to do what's best for the case. It's not about who I'm sleeping with. It's about these charges that were voted on.
Adults have relationships. Adults can maybe fall in love. We don't know. We'll see what happens to their relationship. But I have to ask you, does it say something about her judgment? I mean, was that a mistake? She has the eyes of the country on her. She has this incredibly important case that spans several states, dozens, not dozens, but more than a dozen co-defendants. I mean, did she make a huge mistake here?
Look, Tom, I'm not the one to judge another woman about what's in her heart. You know, if she loves the man, if love led her
But I'm not asking about love.
But she shouldn't have. Yes, I think it was a bad decision because, you know, with anything having to deal with Trump, that someone's going to look at every little piece of your life under a microscopic lens.
Angela, I'm going to put you as an attorney for the co-defendants or for even Trump himself. If you're on that side and you're going after the DA, I got to think you're not going to let this go, and you're going to chase this down until you have something very concrete. And it looks like they have something with this admission.
Absolutely, because I think that there remains a question, is there a conflict of interest? If there is a conflict of interest, there's a problem, and thus she or Wade should be excused from the case. So while I think it is distracting from the main topic, you still need to figure out, is there a conflict of interest? Are the defendants here getting their fair right to a trial? That's the whole point of this.
I think we have some, we have an element I want to put up on the screen if we can get it. It's the receipts. In her filing, Fani Willis put the receipts, and she essentially said, listen, we split things, you know, here's the Delta tickets, and we went on vacations, but we split everything 50-50. Fine. If Fani Willis is found to have lied anywhere in her statements, and I know there was sworn affidavits, what happens to this case?
So I think it puts the case in a different lens. It changes the conversation because now we're talking about a lie, if that is the case. But also you got to think about that it may cause somebody to look into you criminally to determine whether any of the funds that were used for this vacation and these lavish vacations or dinners were a part of the money that was used to pay you. So that's going to change things. But still, I do not think that it does anything to the prosecution itself. If anything, it may disqualify her and another prosecutor would take over the entire prosecution. But it doesn't dismiss the case because you still can't show that there was any prejudice in the prosecution or the presentation of this case to a grand jury.
But taxpayers are funding this investigation. They're funding this case. And now there's a distraction. And now instead of spending time on trying to convict the former president, which was their goal, they're now having to figure out this relationship, talk about this relationship, file legal briefs over this relationship. Has it spun out of control, or can the DA be savvy enough, smart enough, have the facts on her side, and get this back to the focus of which is trying to investigate if there was interference, election interference in the state of Georgia?
Well, I think the problem is that Trump's team claims that they have witnesses who they will put forth on this evidentiary hearing stand about when this affair happened, when the relationship started, and try to impeach and rebut her testimony in her affidavit. So I think that that could be problematic if they're shown to be real lies.
And all of this is sort of helping the former president in a way because it's delaying the trial, right?
Yes.
Because there are now delays in the trial, correct?
Absolutely, because Judge McAfee is not going to move forward with the case until the decision has been made. You have to decide all motions before a trial can be set forth for the other defendants that remain.
Angela, we're going to finish up here, though. How effective of a defense strategy is this? Is this sort of a long shot strategy, or is this kind of a classic defense attorney who was very smart, got a piece of information, and now they're trying to unravel this entire case?
Yeah, I mean, you have to go forth with any lead you get, so it is expected that this would come forth. Now, should this derail the entire case and become the topic of our national conversation? Probably not, but that's where we are.
Angela Senadella, Bernarda Villalona, we always love having you guys. Thank you for being here on a Friday. Next tonight, we head to Michigan. Jurors there heard closing arguments in the involuntary manslaughter trial of Jennifer Crumbley, the mother of the teenager who shot and killed 4 students at Oxford High School. NBC's Maggie Vespa has more on this groundbreaking case.
Tonight, Jennifer Crumbley's fate will soon be in the hands of a jury after closing arguments in her involuntary manslaughter trial honed in on whether the 45-year-old Michigan mom broke the law by failing to stop her son from killing 4 classmates at Oxford High School.
The shooter learned how to shoot and was given the murder weapon by his parents.
No one could have expected this, including Mrs. Crumbley.
Prosecutors suggesting Crumbley ignored red flags.
He was struggling. He was hallucinating. He was seeing things. She did not give him the help that he wanted.
The defense hitting back.
Trained professionals told Mrs. Crumbley her son was not a risk.
9 days of testimony culminating with Crumbley, the defense's only witness. She was cross-examined by prosecutors today.
And you don't deny that you never once took him to see a therapist or counselor?
No, I did not.
Prosecutors also pushing back on Crumbley's earlier testimony that her husband, James, who's set to be tried in March, was responsible for securing Ethan's gun.
Well, you didn't trust him to get out of bed on time.
Correct.
But this is the person you entrusted with a deadly weapon.
I did.
The defense making one final plea.
I am asking that you find Jennifer Crumbley not guilty, not just for Jennifer Crumbley, but for every mother who's out there doing the best they can, who could easily be in her shoes.
Jury deliberations begin Monday on a landmark question. At what point is a parent legally required to stop their child from committing a mass shooting?
Back now with Top Stories news feed, and we begin with a deadly plane crash on Florida's Gulf Coast. Video shows flames engulfing the wreckage of a single-engine plane and several homes after it crashed into a mobile home park in the city of Clearwater. Authorities say the crash killed the pilot and 2 people on the ground. According to officials, the pilot reported engine failure shortly before that crash. Former President Trump's federal election interference trial in D.C. has been delayed. A judge in Washington calling off the March trial date, saying a new date will be set once the D.C. Circuit Court decides whether Trump is immune from prosecution. The move increases the chances his New York case involving alleged hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels will be his next trial. That trial is currently set to start March 25th. A promising new jobs report out today. The U.S. economy adding about 353,000 jobs in January, according to the Bureau of Labor Stats. That's nearly double what economists expected going into the month. The unemployment rate coming in at 3.7%, hovering near historic lows. Wages rose fast last month, too, with an average hourly pay climbing 0.6% from December. Okay, an update on Lahaina's recovery after those devastating wildfires last year. Mala Ocean Tavern on Front Street reopening its doors this week, the first restaurant in downtown Lahaina to resume business since the fires. Rubble still surrounds the tavern, and the National Guard had to move a roadblock so customers could get to the restaurant. But the owner says he hopes the reopening can help his community heal from the tragedy. We do too. Okay, now to the Americas, and we head to Argentina, where violent protests have erupted in the streets as crippling inflation there threatens the livelihood of its citizens. The unrest coming as a controversial bill proposed by the country's newly elected right-wing president is inching its way closer to becoming a law. NBC's Morgan Chesky explains.
Tonight, the streets of Argentina erupting in chaos. Thousands converging on the capital in Buenos Aires to protest a controversial bill proposed by the newly elected president. Police seen battling crowds with pepper spray, rubber bullets, even water cannons, slamming protesters to the ground where some were handcuffed and arrested. The violent clashes, a response to President Javier Milei's omnibus bill, a sweeping plan that would drastically deregulate the country's struggling economy.
We know the economy in Argentina was already in a precarious spot, so what is different now?
Hyperinflation. And hyperinflation is something that Argentina has not seen in 35 years. So we're talking about inflation levels that make it very difficult to live, even on a daily basis.
Argentina's annual inflation rate is at 211%, the highest in more than 30 years, and more than 40% of the population lives in poverty. Critics of the bill say it weakens the job security of everyday Argentinians.
De todo este proyecto es contrario al interés de los y las argentinas. Muchísimas gracias, señor presidente.
Milei, a far-right political newcomer who rose to fame as a brash TV pundit, has called for a shock adjustment to Argentina's economy, arguing things have to get worse before they get better.
What's at stake here for the average citizen of Argentina?
A lot. There is so much contained in this legislation that we're basically talking about every area of a person's life being affected, which is why everyone is really paying attention to this.
Entering his presidency not even 2 months ago, the self-proclaimed anarcho-capitalist has been met with glaring opposition since taking office.
Tema de que tampoco sabes si qué es lo que va a pasar mañana, si voy a tener para comer, si no voy a tener para comer, si mis hijos van a poder estudiar.
Tonight, Milei's austere plans for Argentina's economy, leaving some feeling like they're teetering on the brink of economic survival. Morgan Chesky, NBC News.
Time for a check of what else is happening around the world, which means it's time for Global Watch. We begin with a deadly explosion rocking the capital of Kenya. Look at these pictures. The new video captures the moment a huge fireball erupted in Nairobi, setting homes, cars, and buildings ablaze. Authorities say workers were attempting to fill gas canisters on a truck moments before the blast. At least 3 people were killed and nearly 300 people were hurt. Police say the death toll is expected to rise. An update to a story we first brought you last night. Cuba's economic minister has been replaced after delaying a fuel increase. As we reported just hours before a massive and devastating price hike was set to take effect, Cuba's economic vice minister announced it would be delayed due to a cyber attack. It's unclear when the proposed 500% increase will go into effect. The ministers of Science and Technology and Environment and Food Industry also have been replaced. A major blackout impacting thousands in Toronto, and it was caused by a raccoon. Officials say power was shut off for about 7,000 customers for several hours Thursday night. Firefighters received multiple calls of stuck elevators with people trapped inside. Luckily, no one was hurt. Now, a local power provider says a raccoon made contact with equipment, which triggered the blackout. And you may be asking yourself, is this next story real? I'm told it is. An unlikely rescue after a Tesla plunged into a freezing fjord in Norway. A new video shows this, a floating sauna. That's right. That vessel there is a floating sauna coming to the rescue after guests on board spotted the sinking car. 2 people inside the Tesla managed to get out. The captain of the floating sauna and his passengers helping to pull them out of the water and onto their deck. No word yet on how the car ended up in the water, but luckily everyone is okay. That does it for us tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. Stay right there. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.